Hello and welcome. You're watching Business Plus. Do you make financial choices based on videos you see on the internet, mainly YouTube? If yes, it's time to rethink your strategy. The rise of Finfluencers or financial influencers is gaining popularity in India, particularly among younger generation. They use social media platforms like Twitter, Instagram and YouTube to share their insights on personal finance, investments and other financial matters. This trend is worrying, for it points to a rise of influencers with no background or knowledge of financial matters who dole out sensitive information affecting the masses, leaving them with losses at best and debt at worst. Very recently, actor Arshad Varsi and his wife were fined for promoting misleading videos on YouTube. The videos made exaggerating and misleading statements of financial influencers channels, resulting in inflating the price of stocks. The stocks were then sold at a higher rate to leave common gullible investors with losses. The scheme called Pump and Dump has brought financial influencer economy or Finfluencer economy as we call it in the spotlight. Our Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman in fact recently cautioned consumers against financial influencers and warned that several apps offering financial schemes are in fact Ponzi scams and common man should stay away from them. We are going to be discussing all of that and more. With me in the studio, my colleague Karthik and Suyash. Let me come to you, Suyash, first. We don't have a law just as yet. Finance Minister there warning the masses against, going for such influencers in order to get insights into where they should invest. However, a scheme or a guideline was rolled out in January of this year by Ministry of Consumer Affairs. Can you run us through what the guideline says?
So, Shweta, there is no regulation on financial influencers as of yet, but Centre has introduced a set of guidelines in February, and according to them, if they are receiving any sort of a material kickback or a material like in form of a kickback for endorsing a particular brand or a stock, or a discount or a product that they are getting. Now they have to make disclosures, and these disclosures have to be in very simple and plain language which are easy for the consumer to understand, and they should also be run for the entire duration of the endorsement, right? Okay. And in case of violation, there is a fine of ₹10 lakh which you have to pay for first time defaulter has to pay, and for subsequent defaults you have to pay ₹50 lakh. Now CCPA can also ban such defaulters for a period of 1 year from endorsing anything, and for subsequent offences they can also they can increase it to up to 3 years.
Okay, so but this is a larger guideline for influencers in general, nothing particular as far as Finfluencers is concerned, Karthik.
So Finfluencers, Shweta, is actually a fairly new term, and we've seen these influencers talk not just about financial products but a whole host of things on social media, and that is what sort of gives them the influencer tag. And how is the influencer community really defined? Anybody who has access to an audience and wields a power to influence a purchasing decision of that audience that they have a control over are referred to as influencers. Okay. Now you've got influencers endorsing or suggesting a whole host of products that people like you and I can go and invest our money in. So we either invest money or we spend money by buying something that they are endorsing. Now traditionally the difference between, let's say, advertising and this is called a native product placement, so to speak, the difference is that an advertisement runs in commercial time, runs with a promotion label on it, has a brand ambassador who is usually a celebrity that people know that the celebrity is not directly involved with the good or the bad of the product and is being used only to market the product. What happens in the case of influencers is that these are regular people, most of them. They are regular people, they are not celebrities, you don't see them on the silver screen, you don't see them in TV ads, you don't see them on soaps, on operas. These are just regular, ordinary people who create content, and through that content and sometimes the marketing that they do around their content, they are able to aggregate a huge audience base. And now this audience base trusts them because they believe that whatever words of wisdom are coming from the influencer, these are not these are not driven by the power of money, and these are mostly done on goodwill, which is actually not the case. But thankfully, we have on this panel, and I'm sure you're just going to go to the rest of them. We have somebody like Pranjal Kamra, who is a legitimate influencer,
Pranjal
Kamra, who's a legitimate influencer, who's somebody who has the right credentials, runs a legitimate website. I think it's very difficult for people like you and me to understand who is a legitimate guy and who is running a Ponzi scheme.
Absolutely, absolutely. We have a power-packed panel. Joining me at this point in time, Subhash Chandra Garg, who's a former finance secretary. Also with me, Prableen Bajpai is the founder of FinFix. Pranjal Kamra, CEO of Finology Ventures. Appreciate you all joining us for this very important discussion. This drives the, the larger investment cycle in this country. How common people put in their money, where they put in their money, what sort of returns they get. But before we discuss, finance, in terms of finance parlance as to where you should put in money, who you should trust, let me come to Subhash Chandra Garg, sir. I want to begin by asking, I understand there is no law in place, there is no regulatory framework as far as, Finfluencers is concerned in particular, but what is the larger sort of framework within which these Finfluencers fall? What sort of ambit does RBI, SEBI has to contain Finfluencers and the kind of messaging that they put out?
See, the financial advice or investment advice has been a matter of always a major concern for the government, the regulators, RBI and SEBI, because there is a relationship of one where somebody has a lot of knowledge, information, where the other side, someone has only money to invest. He is motivated by the desire to make money, returns, gains, but no real understanding of the companies or the investment or the sectors. And therefore, currently what we have is, number one, SEBI has regulations for what we call the investment advisors. In fact, there is a very detailed regulation which requires the investment advisors to register with the SEBI. There is a code of conduct for them and in which way they can make advice and all or not. Various returns and information systems have to be filed with the SEBI. Ironically or incidentally, what we are describing as financial influencers or the Finfluencers, they are exempted from that investment advice regulation. They're not covered by that. And therefore, they're not regulated.
Why is that, sir?
The reason is very simple, because the investment advice is supposed to be from the expert advisor to the client, to its clients who pays for it. And therefore, both of them are in a way participant in the stock markets and all. Whereas the influencers or the wider community, social media, newspapers and others, they are the ones who offer the advice to anyone. It's not particularly, in general. So the assumption is that whenever something is offered to anyone in general, you are not actually getting any consideration and you don't owe that kind of service obligations, or your chance of getting affected or making money at his cost or something is much less. But here, that is why the current regulations, we also have regulations for the research analysts, which the SEBI has come up, those who make recommendations that this is the price at which this is fair price to and this might go up like this. Even there, the so-called this broader community of influencers are exempt from that. So that is the status. But what has now come up, and that is where Suyash was describing the regulations which the consumer's affairs has come up. Now, the client or the consumer is not paying for it, it's fine. But the one company or someone which wants that investment to be sold, if they are paying, that can also influence the motives and the judgment and the soundness of the advice of the person concerned or the influencer concerned. And therefore, the concept of what is what we have in general, that the consumer needs protection. Here from the influencers, the advice takers are like consumers, and therefore consumers need to be protected. And what has been thought in general, which includes the financial influencers also, besides all the other social media influencers, is that if they disclose that they are being paid by someone to sell their product or push their product, if that disclosure is made, then that's a sufficient disclosure to the people that they may not unwittingly believe that someone is giving you an advice which is sound in itself. That is the rationale of the regulations which have been brought by, or the guidelines which have been brought by the Consumer Affairs. But believe me, and I think all of us need to take that, the efficacy of this kind of regulations is very suspect. Go back to the cigarette regulations, where you have to put out that this causes you cancer and other kind of things. But how many people have got influenced by those ferocious and kind of ads? But even that were the images. So it's a difficult subject. Everyone will struggle to do it, but perhaps the solutions are not as easy as sometimes we would like it to be.
Okay, solutions are not easy, not forthcoming. But let me get in Prableen Bajpai at this point in time. Prableen, we are talking about people's money. We understand that a regulation needs to come in place in order to regulate the way Finfluencers promote a certain sort of investment, an entity. But the idea that anybody can be an influencer is very damning when it comes to money matters.
Right. So Shweta, these are people who are creators of content, and in this case, the content created is on topics of finance. So it can be personal finance, it can be related to cryptocurrencies, stocks, and over a period of time, they are able to gather a mass base. And with that mass base, of course, there can be a tendency to, have certain vested interests, because you have a huge base which follows you and believes that whatever you say is right. So I think the primary motive of majority of these people is initially to, go and educate. So education is the basics, I think, on the basis of which they start off. But I think during that course of educating and having a mass base, then these sort of interests come in. And we've seen in the past that, we've seen cases where there was a crypto exchange which was halted. And we did have influencers from India also who had spoken about those products, saying things like guaranteed returns. But these are creators and they are not part of the ecosystem which is governed by SEBI. Like Pranjal Kamra is here today, but he is a registered investment advisor. So he is part of that ecosystem, but there are so many people who are financial influencers and are not part of that ecosystem, where there is a certain code of conduct, there is a penalty on what you do, the do's and don'ts are spelled out. So SEBI, of course, 6 months back has already spoken about stronger regulations. Earlier this month, we saw, a guideline on the advertisements by RIAs and the analysts, which can be done. But I think the problem is, that thin line where people say that we are educating, but in disguise, they are actually advising things which are not in the best interest of their followers.
Okay. Pranjal, do you agree that there is a need for minimum qualification as far as, becoming a Finfluencer is concerned? Not everybody should be allowed to do what you're doing.
Oh, absolutely, totally. See, the reason behind this is 2013 investment advisor regulation comes. The intent of the regulation was actually to regulate the means through which advice was happening a decade ago. And it covered all those bases. But in the last decade, the medium of consumption of investment advice has changed drastically. So the regulation is losing its purpose if the primary mode of disseminating investment advice these days is not covered. That's one, that's absolutely required. Also, second, this wheel of financial education, that we are providing education, we are not giving financial advice. Trust me, I'm on both. Done in YouTube, done making YouTube videos for the first year when I was not registered. So I started YouTube in 2017. I got registered in 2018. And why did I get registered? Because I realized that in due course, even if your intention is to give just plain simple education, say I create a video on what are index funds, and I get 1,000 comments saying, should I invest in this index fund? Should I buy this fund instead? Now, whether I say yes or no, I'm in effect giving investment advice, at least through my comments, if not through the content. So trust me, any influencer, it's impossible for him or her to operate without willingly or unwillingly actually doling out investment advice. Which is why I think whether it be this regulation, some new regulation, or the RA regulation, but some minimum benchmark, educational requirement, and registration is absolutely essential.
Okay. Karthik, taking away from what Pranjal and Mr. Garg said, that there has to be some sort of disclosure. If you're getting any benefit out of doling out the financial advice, then you have to disclose it. And it's one way of figuring out whether the person who's giving you financial advice is giving it to you in his best interest or in your interest. But I personally feel, and correct me if I'm wrong, then this is not enough, because as long as you are not sure of what you're saying, or even if you're sure of what you're saying, it has happened to you, you've made money out of it, you've made money out of whatever knowledge you have, the other person may not. So everybody, in one way or the other, should have some sort of qualification before giving out such advices.
So 3 points that you raised, Shweta. Some qualification, formal qualification, and relevant experience before giving out advice, 100%. See, you also teach at universities, right? You also share your experience that you draw from the newsroom and take it to university. So you've got the education, you've got the relevant experience. But imagine a scenario where somebody has just invested in a mutual fund or in a particular stock which has given him or her a windfall. Does that give the person any qualification in the garb of educating a larger set of audience to go on YouTube and say that, yeah, this is a stock you should invest in, or this is the mutual fund you should expose your money in? Absolutely not. So I think it's very important that even if you are doing an experience sharing, a disclaimer, irrespective of your education and your experience, should be carried that this is something I am doling out of my own experience, and I am not a certified professional advisor, a certified registered investment advisor. If I'm doing experience sharing, it should categorically mention this is only experience sharing, and viewers are advised not to act on the basis of what I'm saying. And of course, in case you are taking some sort of a financial incentive, if you're promoting it because of way of any monetary agreement you've had with an advertiser or with somebody who's promoting a fund, by all means, in all bold caps, multiple times over, all through the screen as a ticker or something, which I think the guideline also mentions, it has to very much be there that this is something I'm getting financially rewarded for.
Okay.
So my question to Pranjal actually is, Pranjal, how many times in a day or in a week have you actually encountered people coming to you and asking you to plug their products, and being a registered investment advisor, how do you ward that off?
Right. Happens all the time. I think probably 10, 20 times a day.
10, 20 times a day. And what's the ticket size we are talking about?
So I reject almost all of them, but yeah, they are ready to pay anywhere close to ₹1,000,000.
That's exactly what I thought. So, my point is, like Suyash had just mentioned, ₹1,000,000 is 10 lakh rupees, which is actually the first offense. You make the first offense, your penalty is 10 lakh rupees. That is practically just one client gone. Somebody offending the second time, the third time, it reaches 50 lakhs. But until you get that notice, until you are really classified as an offender and your license is taken away, you've made much more than 5 million, 50 lakh rupees being the maximum penalty. So, Mr. Garg, is 50 lakh rupees actually an enough penalty to really impose on somebody who's possibly walking in crores of rupees by way of whatever advice they've given already?
See, I think this question is not as simple as that. The presumption that the qualified or well-educated, registered investment advisors make all this sound investment advice, and people have made money or have got good returns by following their advice, is not at all correct. There are many guys who have lost money because of following those advices and all. And the other assumption that those who are considered as uneducated or not very qualified or accountant or something, they don't understand the markets, they don't understand the investment products, and therefore they will necessarily make a poor choice or poor advice. That assumption is perhaps also not correct. You see the mutual fund, they are best to the people, but how many mutual funds make wrong calls? You see it all the time. The kind of disclosures they are supposed to make, they make it. But who cares about those disclosures, and does that influence people's decision? I think the situation, as I said, is much more complex. Basically people are motivated by the greed to make. Earlier, you remember there used to be a lot of tips kind of thing. So some tip will come from somebody,
Right.
And people will even manipulate the stock prices to sort of prove that what the tip was correct. So this is a very complex area. You can't just move in. That's perhaps the reason why the finance minister also said that you just can't rush in. That is they're not thinking at this moment of putting in very difficult kind of regulations there. So whole thing need to be sort of considered very seriously. You can't kill the competition from these smaller guys who are offering their advice. Believe me, no one simply because someone is a small guy and therefore his advice is being followed. That doesn't happen. People make subconsciously some choices that, all right, this might be making a sensible sense, or in the past his advice might have led to this. So penalty question, that 50 lakhs or 10 lakhs, these are very arbitrary numbers. They don't make the smaller ones may not even be making 10 lakhs rupees even in a month of time. So for him, that's a very huge kind of penalty. So what disclosure has come, you must make that kind of disclosures. But even there, the basic question that who is that influencer who would be covered by the consumer affairs guidelines is not clear. There is no system of, they are now talking that, all right, you should form some self-regulating organization or SRO. That's not anywhere near. So please don't look for simpler or, if I may say, simplistic solutions.
So, Mr. Garg, my point is simple. Let's say I happen to have 1 million followers, 1 million subscribers on any social media platform. Let's say I have 1 million subscribers on YouTube. I could be talking about anything from laptops to lights to cameras to LED walls to anything. And if I have been able to command a subscriber base on the basis of an unrelated field of influence that I have, perhaps not expertise, an area of influence that I have, and if I happen to, let's say, get advised by Prableen Bajpai, who tells me that since you are not big time into taking risks, and if you're not really following mutual funds very closely, invest in an index fund, passive investing. Hypothetically speaking, Prableen, no offense to you, but if this is the kind of advice I get, and if that fund works for me, what stops me, not being a Finfluencer, being a regular influencer, to go on my social media and as a word of experience sharing, tell my audience that, hey, you know what, I invested in the Nifty 50 index fund and it's given me a handsome 12% return. So am I then, I'm not getting paid to advertise that product. I am not even an influencer in that spectrum of financial products, but I have a subscriber base who's loyal to me and I make this claim. What happens? Do I come in the ambit of a Finfluencer by just making one video, and then perhaps one video leads to a second, a third, a fourth, and a sponsorship opportunity or a promotion opportunity comes maybe 30 videos down, but by then I have spread my influence already?
See, I don't think anybody can get 1 million followers simply without actually having a track record.
No, I'm saying I might have an expertise in an unrelated field, sir. For example, the pump and dump scheme saw celebrities who did not have an expertise in financial matters, but had a brand and had a subscriber base, which eventually got exploited in the pump and dump schemes.
See, I may take you to a slightly unrelated field.
Okay.
There are many of these sadhus and rishi types, right? They have huge amount of influence on the people on religious or social or other kind of things. They may also offer somebody an advice, right? And those advisors, those people might follow their advice. So there may be situations where someone is following on another account might also believe that if that guy has done well for on that front, it might also be doing well on this front as well, and may
Correct.
follow, right? So will you be in a position to control ex ante that kind of advice to be offered, or the followers not to follow them? You can't.
That's exactly the point, sir. So how, so, I mean, let me maybe take this to Pranjal Kamra then. What are the entry barriers to then become a Finfluencer, Pranjal? If you can share your experience and also tell us, obviously you've got about 4.5, 5 million odd subscribers on YouTube. But what stops somebody else who has expertise in an unrelated field to have command a larger subscriber base than you, which we've seen in the past as well, unrelated people commanding the kind of influence that you do and go ahead and make claims about financial products without having any formal education or experience in those products?
See, absolutely. I mean, currently there's no barrier to entry, but I wouldn't be worried about celebrities occasionally telling their life stories around finance. Say, I bought this house doing this, doing this. As long as they are not portraying them, I think it's okay. We can't violate a bit of freedom of speech, freedom for someone to express his or her life story. That's fine. But it's about what is your primary area of influence. Have you built a community of people who are interested in finance? Do you portray yourself as financial expert, or do you offer directly or indirectly financial products and services to your audience? I think one, portraying yourself through your bio, through your conduct as a financial expert, talking about what the economy will do, stock market will do, and things like that. And second, offering a product or service or consultation for money in any of the financial domains. So if someone is doing these two things, then I think they should be considered finfluencers and should abide by a lot of regulations.
But Pranjal, we have seen examples. We've seen authors, entrepreneurs, I'm not going to name them, but especially in the last 2 years, 2.5 years, we've seen serial entrepreneurs, authors who talk about many other things in life also go on YouTube and give financial advice. We've seen, even the likes of comedians taking on something so serious as financial advice and recommending financial products, using influence they've garnered through unrelated fields, but exploiting it, to really reach out to this gullible set of audiences. Many of them also offer courses which directly take money from the people who are taking their advice, leave alone endorsing a product for which they are getting remunerated. How do we counter this in the real world?
See, this is where you draw the line. If someone is interested in the finance domain directly by earning finance, so if you write a book, you're getting royalty out of it. So if you're offering courses, you're earning money out of it. If you make finance as your business, is when the regulator should include you in the domain. But if it's just ancillary things that you talk occasionally, because we also need to understand that the regulator can only act when there is an aggrieved party who has paid a consideration. Otherwise, anyone saying anything on social media, if you start clamping down on them, that gives huge unregulated power then to the authorities, and that's clearly violation of freedom of speech guaranteed by the Constitution. So I think if anyone, and trust me, once I've seen the comedians, the influencers, the authors, there's so much money in finfluencing that once if they start entering this domain, they make a couple of videos, it gets good traction, they are tempted to then monetize it. So they would launch memberships, books, courses, and that is where the regulator can come in and say, see, this is your business now. And my bone of contention to these finfluencers is that I totally understand that it's your personal advice, it's your personal experience, things like that. But if the regulatory requirements, they're not difficult. It's not difficult to get registered as an RA or as an RIA. the net worth requirement is 10 lakhs, 5 lakhs, 50,000 in some cases. You just need to be a PG degree holder or a diploma holder in finance and you get certified. So if you think you are earning crores or lakhs of rupees and you think you can influence lakhs of people, why don't you get yourself registered when the entry barrier is so low? So it's clearly a lack of intent and lack of, intent to follow the rule of the law of the land.
But then is just registering yourself as a registered investment advisor enough? And by law, if you are an RIA and if there is some sort of an oath that you've taken that you will give the correct advice, should you be legally allowed to even promote a product which may or may not have the end goal result that your client deserves?
See, I mean, all registrations, PMS, brokers, mutual funds, it does not guarantee, definitely does not, but at least justifies the intent that he or she is not someone who is willing to run away tomorrow by making millions. He or she is someone who is willing to put in the skin in the game and is here for the long run. At least the intent is there. And what happens practically is that once you get registered as an RIA, you start getting reminders from BACL, which is a subsidiary of BSE that's actually been authorized by SEBI to keep in touch with RIAs, do soft audits and things like that. You get random audits by SEBI. You get a lot of reminders by stock exchange. So even if your intent was just to get registered and keep doing anything you want to, the ecosystem is such that once you get registered, you might give bad advice. It might not work out, and that's completely fine. Everyone, even if you're an expert, you're prone to go wrong, but it justifies that you have skin in the game, you're here for the long run, and at least you will not do the absolutely blatantly wrong things or scams. You might still enter the gray area. So I think sticking to the regulated players for advice does not negate the risk, but minimizes it for sure, that at least you will not be a victim of blunders and scams.
Okay, before Shweta takes the discussion to Prableen, one final question to you, Pranjal, a candid, point-blank question. Have you, in your experience of being a YouTuber, have you ever endorsed a financial product for which you've got remuneration? And if so, how have you sort of put the disclaimer that this is something for which you've been paid?
Absolutely, I have, definitely. And this is where it's important that, when an advertisement comes with Sachin Tendulkar or Virat Kohli in between an IPL, and when Virat Kohli is, say, endorsing MRF, everyone knows it's an advertisement. So I think a disclosure should be in a format which leaves no room for doubt that this is a product endorsement and not something that I have said by the way as an example. So I think a lot of people, what they do is they put the minimum 10-second disclaimer that sponsored or in partnership with and things like that. I think I like to say it orally that, while describing the product, that whatever I'm saying, I am being compensated and this is a paid partnership apart from the label, which is the YouTube requirement that you have to put the label. But because everything that I'm saying is audio and video, so why shouldn't the disclaimer be in the same mode, video and audio? So that's what I like to do.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, we're going to come to you in just a bit, Pranjal, but let me also get in Prableen at this point in time. Prableen, taken away from what we've been discussing so far. So as an average consumer, if I happen to come across a video, let's say of an author that I follow, who's also doling out now, as a matter of fact, financial advice, how do I really differentiate between the advice that he's giving to me and someone who's registered and is allowed to give that advice by the way of experience that they have and the registration that they have? How does an average Joe, average consumer, average commoner differentiate between the two advices that they're getting?
Right. Shweta, I think a couple of red flags which the consumers and audience like us can actually look out for. Number one, that, as investors, I think we should be aware of baseline interest rates in the economy. Let's say a RBI scheme or a senior citizen scheme or your fixed deposits, if you're offering you somewhere between 7 to 8%, and there comes an influencer who says that it is a guaranteed fixed income product, which is going to give you 14% or 12%, definitely it's a red flag. So you have to know what is, possible and these are rates by the government of India for various schemes. So maybe 1 to 2% above those is acceptable. You may think that, okay, it's a maybe a private bank or some other product which can give us slightly more. But if it's a fixed income product and it is giving you, let's say, 5% or 7% over and above what a government scheme would give, what is the source for that alpha generation? Of course, it cannot be risk-free. There has to be a huge amount of risk to get that sort of a return. So I think the first is to understand what is happening. Similar, with equity-related products, Nifty in the last 10 years has given about 12% returns. So if somebody comes and tells you that, you're going to get 35% returns, or your money can double, let's say, in the next 8 months, it's not possible. Given a standard 10% return also, Shweta, a basic rule of finance tells us that the money will double in more than 7 years. So basically, as consumers, as investors, we need to understand that there are no shortcuts to creating wealth. If there was a shortcut, probably everybody would have been doing that. So, unrealistic sort of returns, I think, is a very, very big red flag. Second, I think schemes that you don't understand. Cryptocurrencies is something which not many people understood. But I think it was somewhere at the core, even Subhash sir said that it's the greed. As investors, we also tend to get greedy that, okay, let me earn multiple returns by making this investment. So I think as investors, we ourselves need to be more responsible. It is our hard-earned money. And we need to be sure about when we are making an investment, what kind of risks are involved. And never get into a FOMO, the fear of missing out. Sometimes these videos create, sense that if you're not investing, it's a lifetime opportunity which is being missed. So as an investor, as an audience, you have to understand that the investment path is boring. It is a long-term process to create wealth. If it was that easy, everybody would be doing it. So I think these are some basic red flags which investors can keep in mind while taking decisions, and why to just take a call based on a YouTube video, honestly. It's better to approach a person who has the right qualifications and can manage your wealth, through your investment journey. So I think that's a better way to do it. But if you are a do-it-yourself investor, still, I feel that go with the standardized projects which are well-regulated, mutual funds and fixed deposits and other government schemes, instead of going in for a buy now, pay later and other liquid sort of loans and peer-to-peer lending. Those are way higher risk they carry.
Pranjal, you were talking about the registered investment advisors. Like SEBI has some mechanisms where they keep a track of the information that you are disseminating. So how often is this correspondence with the SEBI, and who is keeping a track, or who has that oversight on registered investment advisors?
Right. So it's not that SEBI corresponds regularly. It's basically self-reporting, where in the SEBI portal, required to do quarterly reporting. Any complaints that happened, any changes in the management or leadership that might have happened, any material thing that concerns the investor and the regulator, even change in your email address, phone number, address, any plans that you are changing, any new asset class you're including, and things like that. So it's quarterly reporting. Apart from that, a subsidiary of BSC is being authorized by SEBI to do soft audits. These are not sudden investigative audits, but soft audits, in the sense that they would come, they would check if we are broadly following all the compliances or not, would guide us, suggest us, and things like that. I don't know what happens if someone is completely not in compliance. I don't know, but and of course, SEBI can then, if there are multiple complaints by an investor in the SEBI Scores portal, which is a portal specifically created for consumers to complain against any regulated SEBI intermediary. You could go there and complain. So if there are lots of those complaints against a particular entity and SEBI finds merit in some or a lot of them, of course, they definitely reserve the power to do all kinds of audits.
Okay.
So have you been subject to this soft audit by BSE?
Hanji.
Okay. Okay, interesting there. We're going to come back to this, but another interesting thing that the finance minister also talked about briefly while she was touching on Finfluencers is the need for people to be careful about Ponzi schemes and apps that offer Ponzi schemes. And let me get in Mr. Garg at this point in time. Mr. Garg, what Ponzi schemes was FM referring to when she made that remark?
I don't know, the context was the question on Finfluencers, but she went in and said about the Ponzi schemes. I think there are two major concerns which, to my mind, the finance ministers and the government has. One, in the recent times, we have seen enormous expansion and spurt of these loan applications or apps. They were Chinese controlled apps, and otherwise people offer all kinds of loans, easy loans, and then get into the traps of borrowings, and many are subjected to overcharge, over recovery. Some of them have even force used against them, and so I think that's a very major concern. Some steps the government has taken, the RBI has taken by not allowing those apps to be downloaded through the Apple and other mechanisms. So that's, I think, one. The second one is a classical Ponzi. Various kind of Ponzi schemes are brought out from time to time, but I don't see at this moment any particular Ponzi scheme being targeted or spoken of. Cryptocurrencies were called Ponzi schemes for some time. So I think that's where, but let me, I just like to take a minute on the discussions which you were having earlier. In the finance advice or financial field, see, anyone who is in the business, whether the top-notch investment advisors or the mutual funds or otherwise, or the Finfluencers, everybody in the business is to earn for themselves something. I think that's something we should not forget. They are not in the business of doing charity. They want to make money for themselves. And the money is paid, and these people are paid by basically two sets of people. Either the client or the recipients of the advice pays, or somebody whose product is pushed pays. There is no other way. So influencers, by definition, are not being paid by the clients. Investment advisors are being paid by the clients as the system exists, and therefore they probably make their money by charging or getting some commissions or trips, etc., from those products whose products are being pushed by them. Now, I think the ends of justice will meet if this relationship is disclosed and is in the open, that all right, somebody is pushing this product and is getting paid by that producer of the product. That regime, I think, might serve the purpose, but it will never be possible for any regulator to say that someone only will provide you the sound advice and the others will not provide you the sound advice. There is another difference between the classical goods which are covered by the Consumer Protection Act, where we have a concept called defect in service. If that product doesn't provide you service that which it was promised, then that person is acted against. But in the financial products, it is very difficult to say what is the defect in the service. Is the projection that this might give you this much of return is a guaranteed service? It is not. And that's why I think this area requires much more deft and careful handling, and the disclosure route might be the best route, and rather than doing a very detailed regulation that might actually create more problems. People might get out of the formal space, do it, like we regulated gold at some point of time with horrible consequences. It doesn't happen that way.
Let's take actually this hypothesis to Pranjal Kamra. Pranjal, do you agree with what Mr. Garg is saying? I want to understand from you, what are how is your revenue really bifurcated? How much percentage do you get from, let's say, advertisers who are willing to pay you to endorse a product? How much do you get through the courses that people subscribe to? And how much do you get by pure play access to the audience through, let's say, YouTube ads?
So, because I'm sure it's different for other influencers, but for us, advertisement is negligible because being an advisor, most financial products we can't endorse. So thankfully, sometimes I get endorsement proposals like hair growth oil and things like that. I don't know why I pitched that.
Yeah,
or
I
why
might need that.
but sometimes we get promotions like promoting in, say, an MBA platform, higher education platform, and things like that, which are not connected to the financial domain. And I'm very comfortable endorsing that. It does not come within the financial education domain in most cases. So because of that, our revenue from advertisement is meager. I think should be less than 5% of what we make in total. We offer a lot of financial products. Most of them are DIY. So one of them is Ticker by Finology, which is basically our version of, money control or screener, so someone can come and analyze stocks. That's our flagship product. That's the one that has been running for 3 years. So that's quite well known. So we have a SaaS subscription for that. So a substantial amount of revenue that we get actually comes from that. And yeah, then there are courses. Then there is a premium journalism platform, and then there's advisory DIY platform we run. So it's bifurcated, but I think the biggest money churner for us is actually Ticker by Finology.
Okay, and Mr. Garg was referring to defect in product, defect in service, do you get any refund calls also?
Sometimes we do. Yeah, definitely we do. Okay. I think as long as it's within acceptable limits, we are doing well. But yeah, sometimes we do.
How do you qualify a defective service?
I think, most refunds for us is actually, so ours is a subscription only product that gets auto debited from the account through a UPI mandate. And I just feel Indian consumers are still not used to creating UPI mandates. And so most is, although on our website it's clearly mentioned it's auto debit, we'll keep charging you until you cancel. But I think most refunds are, how could you deduct money again this month? I only wanted it for 1 month and things like that.
Okay. Let me add in, Prableen, we were talking about intent and the absence of it, lack of it, or intentionally trying to manipulate the market, manipulate your audience base, especially when you're a celebrity, when you know you're an influencer. And pump and dump comes to my mind. We briefly touched upon Arshad Varsi, who's been fined now, who's been banned by SEBI. But, there's a larger problem here, and maybe you can come in, Prableen, at this point in time. How do you really stop celebrities from actually endorsing products that they do not either understand or have no knowledge of? Because it's easy to get away with with advisors like this saying that I don't know what I was saying and I was misled. But do you think there has to be an entry barrier that we've been discussing so far, even for celebrities who come with large brand value and large influence, sometimes which is many times that of a common influencer on social media?
So I think, Shweta, in FY22, I think there were cases of more than 400 violations with SEBI noticed, and a lot of them were from the influencers and celebrities. And I'm sure you're on Instagram, I'm on Instagram, even we ourselves have seen a lot of celebrities, TV actors, other, influencers talking about, let's say, cryptocurrency exchanges. We've seen actors talking about it. So I think, they are free to endorse anything that they want, right from a soap to a toothpaste to anything. And they are clearly saying that, it is an advertisement because it's usually as paid partnership. So I think they are sort of off the hook. But in cases where, like Arshad Wasi's case happened, there were about 29 people who were actually, I think, listed by SEBI, banned from buying, selling, and entering the stock markets. So there has to be a penalty wherever things are done intentionally in a manner where the intent is not clear. Intent in the sense, if I'm advertising, if I'm endorsing something, it has to be very clear that I'm endorsing it. And, it is a marketing strategy that I'm doing for a certain product. We have seen a fine of about, I think, 1.3 billion on Kim Kardashian, in the US, because she did endorse a cryptocurrency exchange, and it wasn't mentioned that she's getting money for it. So 1.3 billion US dollars is a huge amount. So I think there has to be huge amount of transparency. Like Subhash sir also said, you can't go and sort of catch everybody that why did you say this and why did you say that. I think it's important that one, that there is clarity that this is an advertisement, there is a partnership involved, and so the message is clear. Second, as investors, as people who are getting influenced, have to also use their own due diligence, Shweta. That is a very important part. Maybe currently social media is reaching so many people for the first time, and the influence on them is higher. I'm sure they would also gain the experience of how to filter information which is there on social media.
Okay, so this is basically a classic case of trying to differentiate between what is self-created content, what is advertisement. That there has to be a larger boundary between the two, not a thin line but a firm line, that this is ad, I'm getting money for it, versus this is content creation and I'm not being paid for it directly. I'm coming from a place of expertise, coming from a place of perhaps scholarship.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Because YouTube, as like sir said, that they have to earn. So I think YouTube is, as it is, giving them the requisite revenue for the content which is created. So I think, Shweta, that clarity between that this is purely a creation and now this is an endorsement, or it is a marketing, it is an advertisement. I think that clarity has to be there, and I think that is the only way your viewers also know that it's not a sort of hidden sort of an advertisement that you're doing, that, oh, I am investing, so maybe you can see, but I'm not endorsing. It can't be vague. It has to be very clear.
Okay, wonderful. I think we can go on. This is an important, interesting discussion. There's so much that we can take away, but I think for me, the biggest takeaway was what Prableen said. Don't live in the fear of FOMO, which is don't think that you're going to miss out on any advice if you're not listening to everybody who's out there. Exercise caution each and every time you are coming across a video. Before you invest, you put your hard-earned money into any sort of financial instrument that is out there. I think it's been a wonderful discussion. Subhash Chandra Garg, Prableen Bajpai, Pranjal Kamra, thanks very much for joining us with your insights. With me in my studio, of course, Karthik Malhotra and Suyash. We will come back with more such important, newsworthy discussions. Keep watching News9 Plus.